Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan read the paper on June 23rd.
June 23rd.
2019.
Yes, the day after Michael's birthday. Happy birthday, Michael. And I have to confess, the Mets have just suffered another defeat. I'm recovering. But I'll get by.
All right, it's good.
I got that out of my system.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
We're still recovering from the wedding, actually.
We are.
We're still cleaning up.
Right.
But it was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. And people keep asking how was it, and I keep saying it was great, and the weather was great, and the parties were great, and it couldn't have gone any better. But it's a lot of social contact, which turns out to be tiring.
Yes. Mentally and emotionally.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Not to mention all the cleaning up.
Yeah. Well, we didn't do all of that, but yes. But in any event, that doesn't mean that we weren't out seeing things and doing stuff this past week. And we went to the movies as recently as yesterday, where we saw Pavarotti.
Right.
And Pavarotti, of course, being a documentary about Luciano Pavarotti, the great opera singer, directed by Ron Howard, who's done a lot of very popular movies, and of course was Opie a million years ago on the Andy Griffith Show. And but more to the point, has been responsible for a lot of popular entertainments. It's not an obscure documentary. It's a very Hollywood-oriented film put together, but again about an opera singer. So, if I can be the interviewer, dear, what'd you think?
Well, I was not as thrilled as you were. For me, it seemed pretty normal.
Yeah.
And I guess in retrospect, it was very much a Ron Howard kind of thing.
Sure.
It was a feel-good, not exactly hard-hitting, secret revealing, dark side.
Okay, so but here's the thing. First of all, let me say,
documentary.
Neither of us are opera fans, so we don't
No.
comment. But having said that, turns out you knew more about Pavarotti than I did. So when I'm watching it, I'm saying, oh, he's pretty good. He's really good. He's great. It's one great thing on top of another. It's a little bit of a story. They get into a little detail in his personal life that's a little messy. But what carries you in a way that most documentaries can't is the singing. So they're able to punctuate all these developments in his life with all these wonderful recordings from these live performances, including great footage from the three tenors that he did with Placido Domingo and Jose Carreras. And even though I'm not an opera aficionado, it's quite moving stuff.
Well, but I think that's the key to it.
Yeah.
What I remember, and it's not, I know zero about opera and
Right.
opera singers, okay? But I do remember the general feeling was this guy kind of sold out, that he was, playing the superstar, doing these huge concerts, just basically raking in the bucks.
Right.
And that he was trying to appeal to a broad audience and not trying to, I guess, further the art of opera,
Sure.
Per se. And so I think for people serious about opera, it seemed like he was, not. I don't really
Sold
know.
out. When you put it, you sold out.
And we do understand that a little bit from the documentary, because it is pointed out that at a certain point he connects with Harvey Goldsmith, who is a rock concert promoter.
Right.
Okay, gets him to fill a void left by a cancellation by Bruce Springsteen in London. And, and Goldsmith is able to talk Pavarotti's manager into getting him to do this. Yeah. And then they're off to the races.
Well, you know what?
They're doing these huge shows.
It's all how you characterize it, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't even come at it with the knowledge that you had about him being accused of being a sellout. When you say it, it sounds right. But so they talked about the same events, but they just painted it differently. So instead of saying he's selling out, the documentary took the view, well, he's not selling out. He's bringing his art to the masses. Right. And if you read reviews of it and critical evaluations of the movie, they're saying that's not bringing art to the masses. His responsibility, in their view, was bringing opera to the masses. And you're not bringing opera to the masses if you get there in these large halls and you sing a couple of opera songs and a couple of popular songs and whatever. That's not bringing opera to the masses. And therefore, it is, as you say, a sellout. So it turns out to be more controversial than certainly I realized. But without that background, again, I enjoyed the movie, and because I enjoyed the singing more than I would have thought.
Well, you know, that first Three Tenors concert that was at the, 1990 World Cup in Rome, in the Baths of Caracalla. And that was televised. That was, it's no accident that that footage was well done and incredibly exciting and moving.
Right.
It wasn't somebody's home video
here's what they
of
tell
the
you.
concert.
But here's why the movie sets it up and makes it a different experience. First of all, the movie explains that Jose Carreras had just suffered...
was recovering from cancer.
Recovering from cancer. Had a near-death experience, which I had no idea. Then it says the concert's put together because the three of them, Domingo, Carreras, and Pavarotti, live in the same building in New York.
Right.
And you're going like, what? So they have this personal connection, and Pavarotti was kind of communicating with Carreras when he was sick, trying to sort of pump him up. And in a way, it was sort of helping Carreras get back on his feet in terms of performing. And then you also have interviews with Placido Domingo talking about how great Pavarotti was and talking about what a great experience that whole thing was. And he says at one point, you really know a person when you sing with them. Right? So that's what the movie does. It adds a lot of
and they were consummate performers.
Oh,
they really.
And he even explains at one point that how they're trying. He says at one point, we try to one up at each other, and they go to a clip, and he just tells you a little bit, but you can see what he's saying. See what Pavarotti's doing here. He adds a little flourish, and then we're laughing, and see us come back, and we, so it gives you a different appreciation.
Mimic his flourish.
Yeah. So look, I would recommend it. Whether it's got Pavarotti exactly right, I can't say.
Yeah, we basically went to it because the Rotten Tomatoes score was 98%.
That's right.
For people.
Right.
Okay.
And we're people.
88 or something for critics, but 98.
But that's high too. I mean, it
is high, but it's probably all people who like Pavarotti who are going to go see it.
Anyway, right? It was it's much higher than anything else we see in terms of our choices. So
a little bit of self-selection there.
Yes, we like that.
But anyway, moving right along.
Yes, we both found a story which about ancient bagels, which you can't go wrong with a story about old bagels, really.
Right, and so the headline in the Times was way back when bagels were tiny, and the subtitles: archaeologists identified Bronze Age pieces of dough rings at an excavation site in Austria. So there's a site in Austria that dates to about 3,000 years ago, about 900 BC, and it actually is a place that it was some kind of installation, and they had found storage areas. About 100 different storage areas, storing different things, including, cereals, grains, human remains, and there were also ovens with these tiny fragments of little circles made of finely ground grain.
Yeah.
Okay? And they seem to be, little circles that, but you couldn't find, they couldn't find the end to them. So even how they're made seems a little mysterious.
All I know is that the Times has pictures of what look like old bagels.
Yes. And they're small. But and the Times does recognize that it's rare to have any kind of remains of food this old. Okay? For the reason that usually they quickly deteriorate. But there are older examples. There was a ring-shaped bread dating from 12,000 years ago found in Switzerland, and some in Italy from about 300 to 330, and even some Viking ring-shaped breads in Sweden dating from almost 2,000 years ago. So it's, interesting to us because it's true bagels in my mind, deteriorate quickly. Okay.
Yeah. So we were kidding before. You said something about old bagels. We know about old bagels. Yes. Whenever my parents would visit, my dad would come with a bag of bagels, but of course he bought them, they were a day or two old because he would get a good deal on a day or two old bagel or something like that. And they were old bagels.
No, Daniel, that's not it at all.
What is it?
They were planning ahead.
Ah,
okay?
that's what it was.
You're
right.
No, they're bringing bagels to Block Island.
On the weekend.
Right.
And he would buy them on Wednesday.
No, he would buy them on Monday because he's going to be too busy packing on Wednesday.
No. He thought they'd run out of bagels.
They're going to... He gets all the bagels, like 24 bagels,
right.
All right, wraps them up,
right.
And then by Saturday, I guess, they would take the ferry over to Block Island, and we would finally be the recipients of
the
5-day-old bagels at Block Island.
And they looked...
Their heart was in the right place. And the thing is, they were probably real bagels. Not the spongy, sort of overgrown,
they were real bagels,
round rolls that we have now.
Real
bagels would, in fact, taste like rocks at that point.
They looked a lot like this picture in the New York Times.
So we have a fondness in our hearts for old bagels.
Right.
And so, of course, when we see a story about 3,000-year-old bagels, we identify.
When we find out when the first everything bagel was, then we'll know we have some specific information. The NBA draft took place, the basketball draft, which I came home one night to watch Tamsen watching on the television as if she were wrapped, carried away.
I watch it for the fashions.
What?
Those guys. I don't know what it is about. I think that basketball players look better in clothes than some of the other athletes.
Yeah.
But they had amazing outfits.
Yeah.
All kinds of amazing outfits.
Amazing's a nice word for it. Yes.
You're just you're being a poop.
They're crazy.
They looked great.
They're nutty.
They're not always loud. I mean, they're not. You might be more comfortable wearing them to the prom than to work on a daily basis. But there were like floral brocaded suits and white suits, and
sounds good.
All kind of fantastic outfits.
Well,
it's nice to see these young men dressed up a bit.
Okay.
All right.
So the first two picks were Zion Williamson and Jay Morant, and they were far away considered the best prospects. Wait a
minute, who are those people?
Zion Williamson and Jay Morant.
Zion Williamson, yeah. I think he's the one who had the white suit on. And they compared him to LeBron in his white suit.
Okay.
Right.
Putting fashions aside for just a second. Okay. So those are the first two guys, the two best basketball players, the two best prospects in the country. And what's crazy about this is it turns out they played on the same travel team when they were 14 years old, which is, they were in South Carolina. One lived 45 minutes from this travel team's headquarters, the other 45 minutes the other direction. And they ended up on the same team. It wasn't a big deal, a shoe money team or anything like that.
What are the odds?
What are the odds? I mean, I coached East Windsor.
What part of South Carolina?
Spartanburg. I coached East Windsor basketball, boys and girls a little bit, for years. I don't think my team or any other team had two players in any year who were the top picks in the NBA draft. The odds in that are like a zillion to one. You'd like to think that team won a lot of games. But you said that there were two other players who were from the same...
Well, now you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah, well, I know. Go ahead.
I can't possibly say his name. I mean, R.J. Barrett.
R.J. Barrett. That's easy to pronounce.
And another Canadian...
Right.
Iggy something.
Yeah, no one will know.
With a B.
Yeah, he's in the second round.
And so they've known each other since they were 8.
They're in Canada.
They know each other's game a little bit, I guess. So they'll be there.
So it's not. So it
breaking
happens.
into the Knicks.
It happens.
And they asked poor RJ, is he ready to carry the Knicks on his shoulders?
RJ Barrett. And what did he say?
And he just looked at them and said, I haven't even played a single game. How can you even ask me that?
That's a very good response.
I think he seems a pretty poised young man.
There are a lot of people who were high on him, and yet he was clearly number 3, not 1 or 2. But going out of high school and into college, he was considered the best player in the country, honestly. And that was just a couple of years ago. So who knows?
Well, he indicated strongly he would like to be in New York.
Yeah, and he's got his wish.
For a variety of reasons. But we don't need to go into that here, do we?
Right. So, carbon dating you were going to go discuss, because we haven't talked about that recently.
Carbon dating. It's a favorite subject because, in history of art,
Yes.
we use it a lot. And in the Times, actually, this was from a little over a week ago, there was a headline, How Art Forgery Sleuths Learned to Love the Bomb.
Mm-hmm.
The period of nuclear testing gave at least a temporary boost to radiocarbon dating. How can you tell if a painting is a modern forgery? Mid-20th century nuclear bomb tests now may hold a clue. And of course, so you understand that we're all living things, including grass, etc., made up of carbon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Different kinds of isotopes, carbon-12, carbon-13, carbon-14. Some of them are stable, some of them are not. Carbon-14 is not stable, as they say. So that when you die, okay, the carbon-14 in your body starts to deteriorate at a very regular rate.
I see.
Okay. So that if you can analyze the carbon-14 in anything that was once living,
mm-hmm.
whether it's a piece of, charcoal used on a cave painting,
mm-hmm.
Or whatever, you can figure out the date based on that regular diminution of the isotope.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now, I mentioned carbon-12 and 13. Carbon-12, 13, 14, they're all usually present in a stable ratio. This is where it gets complicated, okay? But during the time...
Yes, right.
All right. During the time of the early, mid-20th century, where we begin to have nuclear testing, all right, those tests created even more carbon-14 out of the atmospheric nitrogen that resulted, okay? So there's this huge bump in carbon-14, and it changes the ratio between carbon-12, 13, 14. And so you can really, if you can look at things that come about after that time, their isotopes look distinctly different than anything before.
Right.
Okay, and after 1963, we get the ban on nuclear testing. Okay, so you can really isolate if you can analyze that makeup. You're dozing off.
I'm not dozing off. I'm just concentrating. Yeah.
But it allows people to zero in on this particular period.
Okay.
So you may be able to analyze, say, the canvas that is used in a forgery. Okay, and be able to, based on the flax.
Okay. Now I got it. But
it was made.
But you're saying if the forgery is done in that period. In the 40s, 50s,
it will
or
show
60s.
up.
Okay, that's I got you.
Okay,
all right.
In a very specific way.
I was wondering where you were going. All right, got it now.
And you need only, and methodologies have come such a distance that you need you can do these analyses with teeny bits of what was involved in making the painting. Now, forgers do tricky things like use old canvas from another period and paint on it. But the paint, the binder in the paint, the oil used in the paint is not old. Okay, you can't get 16th century oil to use in your forged painting, so they can analyze that and try to, and specifically find out how old it is.
All right, I got it now. I feel like I got a
full
education.
So it's this bump, this change in the amount of carbon-14.
So something good came out of the testing of the nuclear device.
But you know what's happening?
No, what?
So even though there was this bump, as time goes on, the bump is disappearing.
I would expect so.
Okay, so there won't be this clear signature for this period.
Okay.
But anyway, it's just kind of fun. They could take a sample of the linseed oil, remember, and get back to that original carbon-14. But it has to be something living. Yeah. It can't be a rock. Rocks were never alive, I don't think.
No. Call that living? I would say no. Probably not. The Tonys. We didn't talk about the Tonys because you took a deserved break last week. and we didn't get to it. But
well, we should say that we were bored to tears.
So I'm trying to think. I don't think it's enough to say that the Tonys weren't an interesting show. The question is why. Okay, I mean,
it's
what would
not
you do
enough
to make?
To say. You want to really grill them.
No, I want to be constructive. Look, James Corden's pretty good. We got no problem with James Corden. That's not the problem. But they don't seem to think hard about this. Let me give you an example. Okay. Well, look, the first.
They don't seem to think hard.
No.
Dan, think about what you're saying.
They don't seem.
They thought a lot.
No, they didn't.
They thought the wrong things.
Well, maybe, but first of all, there's one problem that they sort of got and they sort of didn't. I mean, Corden gets on at the beginning and says, television is not like theater. You got to experience things live. They don't show up on television. And then they prove the point over the next 3 hours. Because
nothing looked good.
No. They're doing these dance numbers, which look great in person. And we were thinking Kiss Me Kate looks great in person. And everybody does that. And it looks like zero. I mean...
Yeah, we had seen it. Yeah. It almost brought me to tears. It was so fantastic.
And it looks like nothing.
On the TV, it was completely...
But the same thing was true of Ain't Too Proud. The same thing. The prom looked like High School Musical or something like that. Like, what's the point of that? So it makes no impression. I mean, I'm saying to myself, you're better off having people sing. Maybe... When I think of memorable moments in Tony's, things that other people think are memorable moments, the first thing everybody always mentions, I will tell you, even though you hear things about Evita and stuff like that, the first thing is Dreamgirls, and I Am Telling You That I'm Not Going by Jennifer Holliday. It was sung on the Tonys, and that's the moment in the Tonys everybody remembers. That is not a happy song. That is not a production number.
Right.
Okay. That is one woman singing her heart out.
Right.
And that's what people
remember. You hear that and you gotta say, I gotta get me some of that.
Right. And people talk about that. So I don't know. I think they're going in the wrong direction.
There was not one moment like that.
But there were some things that were, reachable just if they thought about it. Let me see. We saw Jeremy Pope was nominated for two things. He was nominated for Choir Boy, and he was nominated for Ain't Too Proud. You would think at some point in the telecast, someone would acknowledge Jeremy Pope. What if they had an award given by Jeremy? What if they had him come up to give an award and people saying, here's this young guy who's nominated for these two shows?
No, you had to have him sing.
Well, he did sing.
You had to have him do something.
He did stuff.
A little smidge. You did a little smidge.
But the point is, that should have been recognized. They had...
So this is interesting.
Yeah.
Choir Boy, they referred to and they gave some snippets of, some little performances of.
Right.
And a lot of people say, that's the performance that did the best.
Yes.
But of course, Choir Boy closed quite a while ago.
It's like they're out of their minds.
No, they knew what they were doing. They knew that
they gave
that was a format that would work.
But they gave Choir Boy more time than anything else because they spoke about it like a dramatic show and then they quietly showed a scene, in a way that they had no precedent for, considering anything else, because they liked the scene. But it's closed. You're right. It doesn't make any sense. Oklahoma and Kiss Me Kate, we were mentioning this before. They made no connection between Oklahoma and Kiss Me Kate. Oklahoma was written in the 40s. Roger and Hammerstein, and there's a certain theme about America, rural America. Kiss Me Kate is Cole Porter's response to Oklahoma in the late 40s, all right? And now they're competing, and one's considered more woke than the other. They had that debate in the 40s, 70 years ago, and no one makes that connection between these two shows being linked.
No one wants to make that connection.
Why? Oh, I think so.
Because nobody's interested. The old people like us who know those musicals and know about those connections already went to see that stuff.
Oh, okay.
They're trying to engage a new audience.
They're failing. Here's what they should have done. It's my last suggestion, okay? And it's not because I have love for the show, okay? To Kill a Mockingbird is the closest thing to Hamilton that has existed since Hamilton. To Kill a Mockingbird is bringing people in like crazy. It's got unbelievable sales. It's easily the most popular thing on Broadway and will be for years. That was not in the Tonys show at all. What they did is instead, number one, they didn't nominate it. They nominated Gary instead, which was crazy. A show that nobody liked, that nobody went to see, and that closed 2 weeks after the Tonys.
And it's as if the Tonys are saying, we should like this.
They're saying, well, this is new, theater, it's experimental, this is more cool. I mean, you could have done a soliloquy from To Kill a Mockingbird. You could have done a soliloquy from Network. There are so many things they could have done to make that show more compelling. All right, I'll stop there. I mean, it's just a huge opportunity lost. So, I don't know.
Yeah, it was a little bit, you're right. The whole premise was, just ass backwards.
Yeah.
These musicals do not really work. Experiencing these musicals doesn't work on TV.
Yeah.
So let's do it.
Yeah. And we have some other stuff that, maybe, has a good, it's consistent with our social agenda, but was it a good theater? Who the heck knows? And the answer is not really. So, we skipped over this. You should talk about this.
I will get to that.
I think we're up to that. We're up to that.
You're tromping all over me today.
All right.
The Mets lose, and it really destroys
I am upset.
Everything.
All right. Some books you were going to talk about first. Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I say something in my defense?
What?
It was a bad loss. They were losing all game. Whenever DeGrom pitches, the relief pitchers give it up. It's brutal.
All right.
Go ahead.
Okay. Wait, do you have suggestions for them? Because you have suggestions for the Tonys. You must have.
I do, but they're too inside baseball. Go ahead.
All right. Really? For this crowd?
Yes.
This is a very inside baseball crowd.
Not
Come on,
inside
give me
enough.
one suggestion.
One suggestion?
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't pitch Seth Lugo 2 innings, 2 games out of 3. That's a suggestion.
You pitch him more or less?
Well, less. You can't do it.
Okay.
Very few people can.
Okay. All right. Anyway, so it's summer, and I'm doing my summer reading. Okay, I'm really enjoying reading because I'm not reading about carbon-14, usually,
yeah.
With the exception of this week. So I grabbed this book and, put it on my Kindle because it seemed interesting. It's called Cornelia, First Woman of Rome by Dan Armstrong. And so, of course, I'm intrigued by this because it's really a study of a very famous Roman mother of the Gracchi, Tiberius and Gaius.
What the heck are you talking about? Mother of the Gracchi?
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Everybody knows this painting by Angelica Kaufman, where Cornelia is looking at some lame Roman matron show off her jewels, and Cornelia is pointing to her children and saying, "These are my jewels." She's famous for being such a noble woman. Both of her sons die as a result of Roman politics. Mm-hmm. But she's willing to sacrifice them for the good of the state, etc. So she's an important symbol of Roman motherhood. And, I teach that painting. So, I was curious to know a little bit more about the story. It's a historical novel, but it did have a lot of truly historical details. And I got to know Gaius and Tiberius and Roman politics of the period very intimately. All right, so I'm trudging through this, feeling very noble, okay? That I'm trying to understand this for the good of my classes and everything I'm going to bring to my students. And all of a sudden, Gaius and Tiberius actually have a sister, okay? And actually an older sister in the Angelica Kaufman painting, younger. She's portrayed as younger, but she is the narrator of the story. Okay, these are her memoirs about everything that happened with her famous family. And all of a sudden, the story just veers off into Sempronia. That's her name. Sempronia's sexual awakening. Okay, yeah. She has allegedly an unhappy marriage. She, ends up killing her husband or perhaps killing her husband, and she meets a new friend who is a woman who opens up a whole world to her, according to Dan Armstrong, of sexual delights. I mean, it couldn't be more bizarre. You're reading along this really sort of dry historical novelization, and all of a sudden we have, sex with a capital S. I was just mystified. Yes, well, totally mystified. And it reminded me of another book I read by Elizabeth Gilbert, the Eat, Pray, Love lady.
Right.
Okay? And she wrote a book called Signature of All Things. I maybe even talked about this on the podcast before. And it starts out being about the history of American gardening, okay, and horticulture, and all of a sudden veers off with this woman who's fascinated with growing things, suddenly becomes fascinated with oral sex, and she said, really? So I don't know if this is a trend.
It sounds disappointing. I mean, how many times? I think all of us can identify with having been fascinated by a historical novel.
I'm a prude. I'm not against books, sex as a story, but I wasn't anticipating this, and it seemed like a big
Nothing
conflict.
ruins.
But I'm also reading.
Hold on. Nothing ruins a good historical novel by too much, like veering into too much sex. I mean, irksome. I'm sorry. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
And I'm also reading a book recommended on the NPR.
Yeah, the NPR.
Conviction.
Oh, I just saw a review of that in the Wall Street Journal. It looked interesting to me.
It did?
Yeah.
By Denise Mina.
And how is it?
Mira.
Did you finish it? It's
I haven't finished it yet.
M-I-N-A.
I'm holding off finishing it because it's very exciting. I'm going to be sad
when it's
done.
No, they told a little bit about the story.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it a great deal.
Give
that's Conviction.
Give me one line on the story because it will get me back to it. What's the book about?
It's about a murder. It's about the whole family is out on a boat,
right.
and the boat sinks.
And
everybody's dead.
She has a past that she doesn't disclose to her husband.
Right. So all these things start
the husband
unraveling.
Leaves. Her husband leaves with a friend. She takes up with it. Oh, I got it. Yeah.
It's about the rich and famous.
When you finish, should I read it?
It's got some travel porn because you go to Venice and you go to a fabulous resort in Scotland and all these.
That doesn't mean anything to me. Should I read this book or not?
I don't know.
Okay.
You don't usually go for those action books.
Yeah,
there's mystery thriller.
There's
books.
no economics in it. Is that what you're telling me?
There's very little economics, but back to more sobering stories. The death of Molly O'Neill.
Yes.
This week, who died of cancer.
Liver cancer.
Yeah. She was 66. And she's known to us partly because that's one of the books that were in your parents' house.
Well, let's start. She's a food writer.
She's a food writer.
Yeah.
And famous for a book called The New York Cookbook that came out in 1992. And it really went around to famous restaurants, mom and pop bodegas, delis, and all corners of New York City, no matter how humble, trying to, tease out what are the secrets of these various delights all over the city. And really before a lot of other people like Bourdain and Jonathan Gold in L.A. Made really popular this searching out the more humble foods. She said she celebrated all kinds of cooks and articulated very clearly that cooking is what brings us together. For 20 years, Molly says, I tried to tease the extraordinary from the mundane. And so it's a sad loss.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at the book now. It's like, to bake an honest loaf. This whole section has subsections called the Brick Oven Brotherhood, where to buy a good loaf, stalking the perfect pizza pie, to make a soft pretzel, a bagel is a bagel. You get the idea.
Yeah, there was a time when people thought great food had to be fine food in fancy restaurants, okay? And she was part of that whole movement of teasing out extraordinary food in less than fine establishments.
Yeah, I'm looking at this.
And now we think it's normal. Now we're all searching for the hole in the wall.
It is funny. I'm looking at, she says something sweet. The first chapter is called Edminger's Blackout Cake. When I grew up, my relatives would debate the quality of Edminger's Blackout Cake. That was a thing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, she was also, I was known to me because her brother, Paul O'Neill, played for the Yankees, played for Cincinnati Reds. She's from Cincinnati, where Paul grew up and starred for the Reds before he came to New York.
There was some article in the paper 100 years ago where that came up.
She wrote about it. She wrote about what it was being.
So it was in the sports section of the New York Times. Yeah. She's writing about baseball.
She's writing about Paul.
Yeah, and that was kind of funny.
I think she had 5 brothers, and Paul's the one who made it to the major leagues.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So you had.
And I also was noticing the death of Alan Brinkley, leading historian of 20th century America, and he died. He was the son of David Brinkley,
right? As
in Huntley and Brinkley.
I'd like to think people remember Huntley and Brinkley. They were the dominant news team. I mean, they competed with Walter Cronkite. They were on Channel 4. Cronkite was on Channel 2, NBC and CBS. And they were, for years, the leading news commentators, correct?
So he sadly died of frontal temporal dementia, complications, frontal temporal dementia, which, is a terrible, I don't know if you call it a disease or what you call it, but really seems to hit people at a fairly young age. And as you know, my friend Nancy Ferguson suffers from that. And so this is another terrific loss. He's interesting because he was born in Chevy Chase. He's interesting to me because, of course, I'm from the area of Chevy Chase, near Chevy Chase. And he not only was he born the same day, okay, and in the same hospital as Frank Rich.
Right, the critic.
The critic.
The great theater critic.
And they said they both, they lived near each other. They were lifelong friends in a kind of a small Jewish enclave in Chevy Chase.
Right.
You don't think of Chevy Chase as very Jewish at
That's
all.
why it was a small enclave there.
And he went, Alan Brinkley, went to Landon,
right,
a school that is the kind of brother school to the high school I went to, Holton Arms. So occasionally there would be get-togethers, and
you missed it. He's too
that
old
would be
for
with
you.
the Landon
That's right.
boys.
Yeah.
He would have been before my
Landon
time.
boys were probably a tough group. It's interesting that he was Jewish at Landon because I thought that the Landon boys were mostly Catholic. I forget. Oh, that's Georgetown. Georgetown Prep was Catholic.
No.
Georgetown Prep. My mistake.
And he also went to Princeton. So he went from Landon to Princeton. I went from Holton to Princeton.
So you separated by just too many years. Yeah.
But interestingly enough, he ends up being a professor, an assistant professor at Harvard. And he's super popular. Okay? There are lotteries to get into his classes. And guess what? They deny him tenure.
Because he was too popular.
He was too popular. Okay? His popularity rendered him suspiciously unrigorous in the jealous eyes of the tenured professors. Yeah. He was on television occasionally, etc. And kind of renewed the debate over the role that teaching ability rather than scholarship should play in senior faculty. So Harvard turns him down for tenure. He's snapped up by
MIT,
the City University of New York, and then he ends up at Columbia.
Yeah, he did all right for himself.
He did all right for himself. But how funny is that? They are basically rejecting a good instructor.
Well, all these obituaries that we've been talking about appeared on the same day in the New York Times. And the person who was the most famous, I feel confident saying, at the apex of his popularity is a third individual whose name was Charles Reich. Charles Reich died at the age of 91, wrote a book that was published in 1970 called The Greening of America. And it appeared first in sort of in New Yorker magazine, or at least a lot of it did. And it became enormously popular. And the theory of the greening of America was that, let me do this quickly, that there were three states of consciousness. First, the national consciousness, the nation's early self-reliance. Two, the conformism of the New Deal. And three, what we were now experiencing in 1970, an unshackling from the stifling moral constraints of the 1950s, focusing on spiritual fulfillment. In other words, he embraced the counterculture and pronounced that the world was going to counterculture. And all these hippies were the harbinger of things to come in the population as a whole. There would be a rejection of materialism and an embrace of flower power. That's where the country was going. And for a brief time in 1970, people believed it. Now, no one's going to believe this now because they say, what? But I'm telling you, people believe this. I was in high school. They were teaching us the greening of America. They were saying that this is where it's going. This is what you're heading for. And some of us are going, really? Is that clear? And that's what they said. And it turns out that notwithstanding the enormous popularity and acceptance of that book in the early 70s, he was wrong. He was completely wrong. The quote here from a cultural critic Thomas Hine in 2007, who said that Reich's mistake was to interpret minor transient phenomena as bellwethers of permanent positive change. He said, for example, bell-bottoms were a way of expressing personal freedom and a comic attitude toward life. He seemed to think that people would be wearing bell-bottoms forever. And they didn't. So, it's one of these weird things where something caught on. It was a tremendous phenomenon. Everyone accepted it for about 15 minutes. And now they're going, no, I guess that guy was really off. And he ended up completely forgotten. I don't think you hear Charles Reich's name very much anymore. No. But I can't really overstate how well known he was and how accepted that theory was. Okay, well, I think that's
about all we have for today. I'm going to go and see if we have any 2-year-old bagels, at least, somewhere to nibble on.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't eat them. Maybe, someday they'll be
valuable.
Part of somebody's archaeological dig. I mean, it is kind of funny to think about how people will go back and look at books like that, look at trends like that, look at, remains in people's refrigerators and reconstruct a whole society that never happened.
Look, I will tell you, if you talk to anybody over a certain age, I don't know what that age is, maybe it's over 50, maybe it's over 60, you say Greening of America, they know exactly what you're talking about. And yet,
after that, nobody.
So we'll see you next week.
All right. This is Tamsen, Granger.
Dan Abuhoff.
Signing off.
On Tamsen and Dan, read the paper.